All right. My name is Chris Hudson, but my name is not that important right now because we're here with the amazing, the fantabulous Dr. Rebecca Dupas. What's going on, Doc? How you feeling?
I'm good. I'm excited about Friday. It can't get here fast enough. And at the same time, I feel like I need more time. I got to let the people know. So it's this interesting energy that I have right now.
Yeah, Friday indeed. Mario goes to the museum. I'm excited about it. Um, I got to get a little preview of it, and it is a glorious, glorious book. Um, I'm really excited to hit Amazon, order my copy. I'm already on the mailing list at RebeccaDupas.com. So for anybody watching, if you haven't joined the mailing list, hurry up and do so because you're slipping. This is a gem, and you do not want to miss it.
Tell them.
I'm trying to. So I got a few questions for you today, if you don't mind.
No, I don't.
All right, well, let's get into it. So I met you years ago at Busboys and Poets, where you were absolutely crushing it as the host and a poet performing. But based on what I know about you, I'm not really surprised that you're writing a children's book, but I am excited about it. What made you decide to step into the world of children's lit? Like, what called you to write this book?
I don't know.
Okay, great answer.
I don't know. I mean, I'm like this. There's no other way for me to describe it. I get an idea and I just assume I can do it, but this was actually a conversation in my head. And it started off as a conversation with adults. As a museum worker, I was observing things. I was observing people, children. And to be more specific, I see a certain loss of innocence sometimes when it comes to Black and brown children in public spaces. I see a lot of management going on from the adults that are with them and from, people who might work inside of museums and other institutions where, Black and brown children aren't able to explore for a myriad of reasons. They're kept still, they're told to be still, they're told to be quiet. They're made to feel like they're going to break something or mess something up. And it's not all Black and brown children. I'm not going to make any type of overstatement about any groups of people, but I have observed that with Black and brown children in comparison to other children who I have seen run and fall and scream and even spit inside of places, just like craziness that I'm looking at. And I'm like, wow, it's not that I want to see all children acting a fool, but I would like to see more children understand their freedom and understand that places belong to them, that they're not interrupting spaces by being there or violating some type of unspoken code. And so that's really what was troubling me years ago when I started really thinking about young people in museum spaces. Right. But that was like Facebook conversations I was having. That was conversations I was having with my homegirl. And probably if I hadn't started to write my adult fiction novel, my women's fiction novel, which I wrote for like 5 or 6 years. I'm still writing it, actually, like editing and whatnot. If I hadn't started that project, I may not have seen myself able to write this book at all. But this idea in the back of my mind became more real to me. And it might have been 2 months ago when I was watching TV, it just poured out. And I was like, it's here. Like, I got the story. And at that point, it was just on, in a notebook. But I spoke with a friend, Asha, actually. I spoke with Asha Watson. And she told me, because she's a children's book author, like, get it done. This is possible. And that's all you got to tell me. So I was like, well, we getting it done then. And so here we are.
Well, not only is it possible, but now it's tangible, right?
Yeah.
It's here. So I guess, well, you said you work at a museum, right? I guess what I'd like to know from you is, what is the value you think of museums in general, but for children in particular?
I mean, in general, museums open our eyes to worlds that either we may not have known existed or didn't know that we had access to, right?
Right.
Um, and I know that people have, differing opinions about museums and the artifacts they hold and their right to tell certain stories, but I see museums as places that preserve not only ideas but also things, so that
Mm.
I can learn about it, my children can learn about it, my grandchildren and their children can learn about it. And so I think the value is just in being able to tell history, not just because history repeats itself when you don't pay attention to it, but because there's so much in this world to know, so much in the past worlds that we need to know that help us to understand who we are as people, who we've been to other people, who we should be to other people. I think for children, it's really about like imagination and discovery, finding things about the world and then finding things about themselves. But
Right.
I think that there's this barrier, if you will, or this glass wall, I'll say, when it comes to children, because if they don't understand that this museum belongs to them, or that the museum is actually this like pathway into greater understanding or greater awareness, whatever the case may be, then I feel like they grow up to be older children or adults that still feel like those big doors in this beautiful building in the middle of my city ain't for me.
Right. And with us being so close to DC, I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I remember some of those field trips with students. Um, and I remember some of those field trips as a student and
Hmm.
that long discussion beforehand. Now, don't do this, don't do that, don't
Yeah.
do this, don't. There was never a you can. It was just a list of don'ts.
Hmm.
So you just sort of walked around that museum on eggshells.
Yeah, which is not what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to be getting close. You're supposed to be reading the panels. You're supposed to be asking questions. You're supposed to be a child, you know?
Right.
And I see that not happening on so many levels.
Yeah, that sort of stripping children of their like curiosity and their desire to explore.
Yeah.
So I definitely saw the necessity for this book. And I did my little Google search and I'm looking through all the books about museums. They're not that many, but books featuring a little black boy and his dad, non-existent prior to this one. Um, so that leads me to my next question. You could have gone with any combination of family members. Why was it important for you to choose the relationship between a black father and his son?
I wanted the world to see this combination.
Mm.
Um, and also, this is almost sidebar, but even in my poetry, like I know what my triggers are. I know what my experiences are. And I write for healing, so I explore those things, but then I always push myself to explore something other than what I've experienced, so I can keep my own perspective broad. Because
Right.
one of the most complicating things for me in conversation is when people are only speaking from their experience. Now, my experience would have been me and my mama,
Mm.
because my father, I know him. We converse every now and again, but he's not in my life.
Okay.
And so I could have easily written a book about a little girl that goes to the museum with her mom. I could have told my story. I wanted to tell the opposite of my experience. I wanted to shine light on a father's commitment to his son. I wanted to shine light on a father leading an educational outing with his son. I wanted to leave the mom a little bit ambiguous,
Mm.
because I do understand that Black men are written out of so many narratives, so many, positive narratives. And so it was almost second nature to me. In hindsight, the conversations about this choice is really, really strong. But for me, I was like, I don't want it to be the typical book. And then once I started talking to parents and to guardians or to teachers, then I realized how much of a void I was feeling by filling. My country came out filling
That's fine.
by making that particular character choice.
Yeah, I recall reading it, and just in the first couple pages, I was a little emotional because it's not often I see myself in a book. Um, at this age in a children's book, what? It's a rarity, rarely happens. And then even when the father is present, there's some like checkered past that that the father recovered from. So
Yeah.
yeah, so for this to just be a tale of, you know, a father and son and an exploration of a building full of knowledge and information, it was gave me the feels. So thank you for that.
Excited to hear that. You have me thinking about what I see in the museum space, because I transitioned from the classroom to the museum as my classroom, I think 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And so often I'm seeing busloads of young people come in with chaperones and with educators. And I'm focusing on like school groups that we're providing programs for. But every now and again, I'll see families, and they'll be full families. They'll run the gamut. It'll be just the mom or just the dad, perceivably, because I'm people watching, right?
Right.
It's been a whole bunch of things. But still, for some reason, out of that, I'm like, Mario is going to the museum with his daddy. I think I like the idea of these two Black male figures being in the space or interrupting the space. You know what I mean? Because I feel like there's so many stereotypes about Black male violence and aggression. And this is a story of just a daddy trying to do something positive with his son.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but that's important to me.
I think it's really interesting that this museum, which is supposed to be a place for everybody, you use the phrase interrupting, because even though they're supposed to belong, right?
Yeah.
Giving all the rules, all the parameters, all the restrictions, it does feel like you're interrupting, even though supposedly all are welcome. So that's just a really interesting choice of words.
Yeah. I didn't even realize it's like I'm not doing it intentional. But what I love about that observation is that those are the conversations that I'm having in my mind. Imagine these imaginary conversations, or these conversations I long to have with other adults. Even with some of my colleagues, we've had similar conversations, and the babies don't necessarily understand this.
Right.
I've started conversations using the hashtag just to like figure out people's experiences. And when I asked them the question about bad museum experiences, there weren't many. Only a few people have responded so far, but there weren't many. And I know that it's not everybody's narrative, but I've also talked to a lot of museum workers who have observed things in their own museums where people are either excluded, or from an observational standpoint, they're being treated differently. And a sister today was saying that she had brought a bunch of young children into an art museum, and they were none the wiser, but the comments that she had observed from the docent made her emotional, made her sad, made her angry that her children were being perceived a certain way. Like the mumblings and the grumblings were all very negative. So I realized that a lot of this goes over the radar, or it's kind of reserved for, certain people. But the fact that I see it, the fact that I hear about it is enough for me.
Right.
In my current capacity, I train docents, and my goal is to make sure that everyone is open and warm and receptive of everybody. And I'm also wise enough to know that that's not always the case. So there's so many untold stories, so many people that might like, something may feel right when I was in there, like, whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
and I kind of just want this story to start helping those conversations bubble to the surface, and ultimately prepare young children so that if they face that, they'll still know, but this museum space belongs to me. I'm supposed to be here.
Well, I guess that's what makes discrimination kind of so insidious. It's that you don't necessarily know what's happening as the patron or the visitor,
Yeah.
but someone who works in that space and knows what it's supposed to look like and know what the environment is supposed to feel like for you, they know that's not being created.
Hmm.
Um, so now I'm even wondering how someone who works in a museum might view this book. Uh,
Yeah, I'm eager. I'm keeping that conversation very separate because for me, the premise behind this book is larger than it. Well, it's different. But it's very much larger than where I work, right? Or my particular work. For me, this is about Black boy joy at the most. At the premier level, that's what this is about. But a number of my colleagues are waiting for this book, and there are some who don't know it exists. And I think that the way that I envision this journey, and I pray it's blessed that way, I'll be able to introduce this book into museum spaces. That's my prayer. I feel like I don't. It's not an attack, but the
right.
conversation around it is important. And I feel like hoping things bubble to the surface and we really start to talk about these things when it comes to children. If it makes someone uncomfortable, I think that's just a sign that there's work to be done.
Indeed.
So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to any potential questions or pushback around any of the decisions, because I feel like truth is truth, and it needs to be told. So
Hmm. I hear you, Doc. I hear you. Speaking of decisions, so this book, right, I think from the child's point of view, it reads like a fun and educational journey, but for a parent or a guardian, it almost feels like an instruction manual by way of narrative.
Okay.
Was that a conscious choice? And like, if it was, how'd you end up balancing serving those two audiences?
Well, one thing I know is that children are going to give you a limited amount of their attention. You know what I mean? Like you got to win them over.
Right.
My youngest nephew is 3. My youngest niece is 9. And so right now, at 9, she's at that age where the things that I used to do and say, or plan for us, she would be 100% in the moment. And now I'm competing with Minecraft. I'm competing with all types of games on her phone. I'm competing with a little friend who's texting her, and it's
Mm.
like, okay, I gotta cherish a little bit of time that I have. So in telling the story of Mario and him going to the museum, I think I understood that I needed to keep this going. He's kind of bouncing along. He might pause and have a question. He might stop and feel an emotion. But kids keep it moving. I think,
Yeah.
like, metaphorically, that was what I was thinking about when I was crafting the story for them. But there was this tug of war in my spirit too, because if I didn't consider some of the real issues that motivated the book, then I feel like I wouldn't have served my purpose. And
Right.
the purpose of me writing this was rooted in these observations I was seeing, where I felt like Black and brown children were learning to police themselves or being policed,
Hmm.
even by the people who love them, whether it was consciously or subconsciously. And I think that there's this freedom that I want young children to feel. So I was talking to the parent and talking to the child, and so I still have the original writing in one of my notebooks, but even though it kind of poured out, there were times where I had to sort of backtrack and think, well, what would I want the father to do right now?
Mm.
Who do I want to speak this particular point? Do I want the dad to take this on, or is there going to be a museum worker that takes this on? And at the same time, how do I keep it fun? So I don't know how I did it. I just know that I had to do it. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad to hear you say that you could pick up on the different audiences, or the way that I was able to speak to different audiences. That makes me feel awesome.
Well, it's because the book is awesome. I mean, that's what it is. So you talk about the attention span of children, and word economy is so important in children's lit. And I know you have a lot to say. Um,
I do.
you have a lot to say. Um, but there's an efficiency of words that is required for children's lit, especially when you're including illustrations. Shout out to CJ Love, killed it with the
Yeah.
illustrations.
Yeah.
Because you need those illustrations to breathe too, right?
Yeah.
Was there a shift in mindset that you had to go through in order to put this together? Or was this sort of, was it a natural shift?
Like it naturally poured out, but nah. Like I had to do some editing.
But
I had to do some editing. And it wasn't much. It was like on specific pages. And even now I have 2 pages that I'm like, you had a lot to say right there. And I don't know that it's going to be like a detriment to the age group that I'm recommending for this book. But for instance, when my 3-year-old was looking through the book with me, there were certain pages I would read and he would just wait. And then the 2 longer pages, he was helping me turn. He like, what else Mario doing? And so I realized, well, he's only 3, but I realized, this whole word economy thing is so very real. But there were things I couldn't afford to take out, and
definitely.
I think that the learning curve for me is maybe the next book just is going to have to be longer, like in terms of pictures, you know what I mean? Like maybe these 2 paragraphs become 2 pages, because there were many words that I ended up taking a knife to, as poet Sonia Renee would say. Like there were a number of words I cut out, but then there were things I couldn't compromise, because knowing the conversations that I'm trying to inspire, like I needed for Mario to feel something or see something.
Yeah.
And so it was just a process. And then also, because this was my first time working with the illustrator, there had to be a balance. These images are absolutely beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. And so, and there's no space wasted in the book, in my opinion. And so we had conversations, and he's like, well, you got a lot to say here, so you only gonna have a picture on one side. And I'm like, well, I'm asleep on that. And then the next day I'm like, well, you know what, that's what we're gonna do, because all these words is necessary to me. So it was this nice exchange, and a nice growth area for me, so that now when I'm crafting the next book, I'm like, okay, Rebecca, you got some decisions to make here. But yeah, it was fun, and it was a nice little song and dance that I did with my very talented, extremely talented illustrator, CJ Love.
Yeah. Sounds like a great collaborator and a great collaboration. And I love how gentle it was. Well, you have a lot to say, so that's pretty funny.
Both of y'all described it well. You said, I know you have a lot to say, Doc. I do.
I do.
It's the truth. It's the truth. But I found a way to pare it down. It's funny because I always say that. I'm learning that about myself in interviews. Anyway, I'm like, it's funny, it's interesting. But a month ago or so, maybe it hasn't been that long since I had this. Let's go with a couple of weeks ago. I handed this book to my 9-year-old niece while she was sitting under the dryer. And then I got on my phone and pretended like I was doing something while she read it. And she was so deep into the book. I can't describe the feeling in watching her, read one page, then slowly turn to the next and read another. And this is the same girl whose attention span is changing towards her TT. Like, she almost over me. She hitting that age where I ain't gonna be too cool to her anymore. But she was in this book. So, even that whole process of me having a lot to say, I feel like I learned a lot about paring it down. Maybe this is like one of my longest poems or something, but I was able to package as much as I needed to in this story, and realizing I can't do it all, but that I still have to do enough so that my spirit is satisfied,
Spirit satisfied. So with this being a different medium and you having a lot to say, it seems like love had a lot to draw to. And when I say that, I speak to sort of the subtleties and nuances embedded in the illustrations. What was that process like to make sure everything you needed was visually represented?
I feel so indebted to CJ. When when I had the draft done and I talked to Asha because she is, an author, she told me, you're going to have to be very clear about what you want to happen on each of these pages. She was
Mhm.
telling me about her experience with her illustrator. And I was like, okay, well, I took notes. And he asked me for my notes. That was one of the first things he did. He was like, tell me what you want on each page. And so, having already been thinking that way, having Asha confirm it, and then have him ask for it, like I felt this sense of I don't know. I don't know. I just felt in it. I don't know another way to describe it. I felt like,
Right.
okay, let's do it then. And so I gave him notes for every single page. I'm like, this is a breakfast scene. I would like Mario to be doing this. This is what he wears in the book. On this scene, they're in a car. I was giving all of these details. And because he's a professional, I'm one book in his portfolio of many. He
Mhm.
was able to take those notes and create these illustrations. And so we would go back and forth. He would send them to me and I'd be like, wonderful. Or I would say, well, I would prefer if he was standing, or can we change his facial expression just a little bit? Because when I say this in the book, I want kids to be able to see that.
Yeah.
Um, and so just to be that involved in the process made me feel real special. There's no other way for me to say it. I was just like, I'm doing this. We're doing this together. I'm a part of this. It was almost like I was an executive producer on a CD. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I felt. I executively produced these illustrations, but I ain't got no
Uh,
talent to draw, so we gonna give all the credit to CJ. But it just felt good. We conversed about it. Things came absolutely perfect. Things might have required a little bit of editing, but I mean, he got it. I feel like he got Mario. I feel like he got me, and the rest is magic.
yeah, I was really taken aback by how like the really, really little messages in there. Like what kind of photo would be in the background during breakfast, or what someone would be doing, a different patron would be doing in the museum during this exhibit or during that exhibit, or how do we want the security guard to be standing? Like, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like there's so like, are we going to see all the security guard? Are we just going to see a wrist? Are we going to see enough to know a particular race of the security guard or a race of another one of the children in the museum? Like there was so
Yeah.
much that went into this.
Yeah. We had so many conversations. Like, a lot is certainly to his credit. Like, there's a page in the book where where I'm talking where Mario is exploring a room with things from Africa.
Right.
And I know that CJ did his research to figure out what would be on the walls. You know,
Mm,
um, I might have said there's going to be the pharaoh. There's a huge pharaoh in this room, but I didn't ask for the hieroglyphics that are there. You know what I mean? So he was clearly thinking, like, what else can I add to bring this picture to life? The complexion pieces, we had conversations about that. I was like, I want, can we make this person, a Black woman? Like, I'm noticing, oh, there's not a lot of women in this book. Can we at least have one? Can we make sure that this page includes a Black woman? So um, he was thinking and making amazing decisions, and working with someone as professional and creative as he is kept me on my toes as well. Every time I reread, when I held that live reading with you and some other wonderful people who gave me some feedback on the draft, um, those ideas came into play because I wanted to make sure that when the book hit the mean streets, that the illustrations and the words were powerful enough to generate what I'm deeming to be some very necessary conversations.
oh, they're necessary, Doc.
Okay.
I got two more questions for you. Just two. Um, so parents sometimes ask me what they can do to help their children become better readers. And one of the first things I always recommend is read with your child and then discuss afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Like, talk about what you read.
Yeah.
And you really help facilitate this process. Could you tell us a little bit about the discussion questions you've included?
Yeah. Just I had some wonderful counsel, and especially coming out of that live reading, you all had me thinking about, okay, so what comes after they finish reading, right? So it's this discussion guide. The book has over 20 questions in the back of it. That in the black. I'm just thinking about Mario. But it has 25 questions in the back, Chris, of the book. For the adults who read to children to decide what's most fitting for their audience. If you're younger children, the first 10 questions might be for them. If it's older children, then there's another 10 or so questions that you might ask. That's really asking them to think about the illustrations. I love the question that you asked. Or to think about Mario's experience, but then also to think about their own experience. If they've already been to a museum, or if they would like to go to a museum, what would they like to see? And even some comprehension questions. I work at a museum, but I never considered that I would ever work at a museum. So that means that I was a grown woman learning the other jobs around me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there's a social media department at a museum. Never thought of it.
Yeah.
It's like 7 of y'all. What y'all be doing? Why it take so many? Like all of these things are going on in my mind, because when I thought about museums, I thought about security guards. Like I just didn't have the knowledge of all that goes into running a museum. I never stopped to think about it. I didn't have a reason to think about it. Right. And so, that's one of the questions in the back, like for the babies, like, can you name 3 professions, or 3, I didn't use professions in the book, but can you name 3 jobs, 3 museum jobs? Because I just want them to begin to think about it. It's another part of this whole inclusive thing with museums. We always talk amongst ourselves, those of us who are people of color on staff, about what it was like to first be in a museum, whether or not we saw ourselves. And even though jobs is not a conversation about race, I just want children to start thinking about it. People say, I want to grow up and be a teacher, which I love. That was me. I want to grow up and be a doctor. I want to grow up and be the president. I haven't heard a lot of young people say, I want to grow up and be a curator. And so I just want to expand those conversations, because from the different conversations I've been on Twitter, there's not a lot of diversity in terms of museum curators, which means that the spaces remain mostly white, not only in complexion, but also in thought and in experience, because that's also a thing. And so we can't change the museum space unless we start exposing it to young people.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because there's so many different careers that I didn't see as a career as a child. I just thought of them as members of society that help the world function. Not necessarily a space I could step into for like employment, and then to add, my own talents and abilities, and then give me a little check too. So yeah, that's a really cool question. I'm glad you included it in the book to sort of get minds going in that direction. Last question for you.
Okay.
After reading this book, I felt seen and encouraged and empowered. And I wish this book was around when I was younger, when I was a child, because I think I didn't see my first museum, I think maybe until 6th grade. And at the time, it was very much, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. But it would have been nice for somebody to call me a precious item too, right? What is it you want your readers to take away from this book?
Definitely a sense of pride. I wanted Mario to be in a museum that was talking about his people, because I understand the importance of that. When you see yourself reflected, not just on TV, not just in a magazine, but when there's an entire building or section of a building dedicated to your people, that says something.
Yeah.
It because so much of American culture kind of leaves out the values and what's special and unique about others. So I want children to feel pride in being themselves, and I want them to feel free to explore. That whole policing thing it's really kind of under my skin, because the thing about living in a society that can and is oppressive or racist is that you internalize those things, and then you just start sort of checking yourself in ways you don't need to. I do that as a grown woman, so I just want to break those chains for children. So yeah, I feel like I was like, okay, pull back, Rebecca. But that's really what it is. I'm trying to break some chains for these children.
Well, I think you are doing that with Mario Goes to the Museum. Again, the book is amazing. For folks looking at this, get yourself to RebeccaDupas.com, join the mailing list, hit up Amazon. The book is dropping on Friday, November 20th. And it's a gem to have. It's a gem to get in the library. So get it for yourself, get it for your child, get it for your niece, your nephew. Just buy a couple. Get them a stocking stuffers. Just get them.
Aw.
Yeah.
Please.
Hey. Doc, thank you very much. Appreciate you.
Thank you. I love these questions. You had me thinking in the moment, but what I love about the questions is that even when we're done, I'm gonna be thinking more so about everything that you sort of called me to speak on. This was good, so thank you.
Thank you.